Breaking this morning as we hit 100 days from the 2024 election, the Harris campaign just announced that it raised, oh my goodness, $200 million since President Biden endorsed Vice President Harris last Sunday. Now, the campaign says about 2/3 of those donors are giving for the first time. They've also seen a spike in volunteers with more than 170,000 signing up in just the last week. Last night, Harris spoke about this grassroots enthusiasm at a fundraiser in Massachusetts.
We're the underdogs in this race. But this is a people power campaign. And we have momentum. The day after I announced my candidacy, we saw the best 24 hours of grassroots fundraising in presidential campaign history. Since then, in battleground states, people have been flooding our offices around the country to volunteer.
Joining us now is Rachel Palermo, former Deputy Communications Director and Associate Counsel to Vice President Harris, and Stuart Stevens. Stuart served as Mitt Romney's chief strategist in 2012. He's now a senior advisor for the Lincoln Project and just someone I just love listening to.
Welcome to everybody. So Rachel, that's a lot of Momo right out of the gate. 170,000 volunteers in a week, $200 million in a week.
That's crazy.
It is a crazy numbers. So, but what does it mean? How is it translating, do you think, in terms of the campaign, the shift from Biden to Vice President Harris? How is this beginning to look on the ground in terms of organization? And has any of that changed? Where are we with the campaign as 100 days out?
Well, it means there's a lot of excitement. It's truly felt electric over the last week. People have been excited across the country for Vice President Harris. And I think a big part of that is that she really draws the contrast between Donald Trump and her candidacy. And people are really excited to vote in November.
Yeah, that's
Stuart,
it feels like that, Alicia.
It does. And Stuart, I want you to take a listen, speaking about that excitement, to the vice president giving a speech in Wisconsin this Tuesday. I think you will find her frame very interesting.
Do we want to live in a country of freedom, compassion, and rule of law, or a country of chaos, fear, and hate? And here's the beauty of this moment. We each have the power to answer that question. The power is with the people.
So, Stuart, the reason I wanted to play that sound for you is because it reminded me of an argument that you have been making, right? Which is there is a clear contrast between the candidates here, but you've argued that part of what the Harris campaign needs to do is draw a clear contrast in the vision these two candidates have for the future of this country. With 100 days left, how do they really articulate that contrast about the America that voters want to live in?
Yeah, I mean, it's just really, I think, maybe the starkest contrast we've had, because Trump is his darkest candidacy now of the 3 times he's run for president. I think usually the most optimistic candidate wins in presidential races. And this, if you just look at what they're saying, you hear Harris talking a lot about the future. And I've always thought that this race was going to hinge on 2 factors. Can the Biden-Harris campaign, now Harris campaign, be the candidacy of the future? And can they be the safe choice? And I think that they're navigating to get there. And what's interesting to me here is their use of freedom. There are a lot of more conservative than not, more white than not, voters out there who voted for Clinton in 2016 at the last minute, who came back to Biden. And the way to get them back is to talk about a intrusive government that wants to take away their freedoms. It's most clearly differentiated with the Dobbs decision, which even though maybe 40–50% of these voters would call themselves anti-abortion, what has happened since Dobbs absolutely appalls them, and they think it's too far. And it resonates in some conservatism in them, that government shouldn't have this heavy hand and be intrusive in your life. And I think the Harris campaign is doing a very smart job appealing to those people.
You know, I think Stuart is right. It is a smart strategy, and as someone said to me recently, you know, it takes 90 days to make or break a habit. You can do anything for 90 days. Tack on 10 extra. 100 days isn't that difficult. And I mean, Rachel, I'm wondering what your take is on just the. What is today? Is today Sunday now? It's been a week of now the Harris campaign. What is your take on how the vice president has emerged on the campaign trail? You know, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, no one had this on their bingo card. And then it seems as though a groundswell happened, and it feels like for people overnight this happened, but my sense is that what we are seeing today, the groundwork was laid all the way back in the transition before the vice president and the president took office.
I think that's exactly right. The vice president actually had been hitting the campaign trail for about a year, where she'd been to 20 states talking to voters, and she would be galvanizing crowds of thousands of people even then. And so what I've been excited to see is how people over the last week have really been able to see what those of us who've been with her have been able to see directly. And that's that excitement, and that's a belief in her vision for this country, and that's a belief that she's the person to take on Donald Trump. She's a career prosecutor, and he's a convicted felon.
Wow.
Stuart, I want to pick up on the point that you were just making in the context of two things. One that has occurred organically, and the other that you've written about recently. The organic part is a week ago, last Sunday, there was a gathering of 40,000 plus African American women, and then another 20 to 30,000 African American men on a conference call. This week, you had a conference call organically created again, this time with white voters, white females and men coming together to support the Harris campaign. So there is some interesting shifts that we've seen from 2016 to now in that space. You write in Politico, it can't be overemphasized what Trump has done gutting the RNC. There is no Trump organization out there of any magnitude, and they're not going to create it. I just don't know where he gets more white voters. So talk to us about what you're seeing there in this space as the ground is literally shifting politically beneath the feet of these two candidates in a way that I think dramatically sets up not just an interesting race, but an historic one.
Yeah, I think, Michael, if we were sitting there on election night and we wanted one stat to predict the race, it's going to be the percentage of white votes that Trump is getting. So, you know, I was looking back at this and checked, and I actually was sort of shocked by this. I somehow had forgotten it. Trump did better with white women in 20 than he did in 16. He went from 2% winning white women to winning them by 7%. At the same time, he dropped with white men from 30% in 16 to 17%, almost in half in 20. And I think that that is where this battleground is going to be. I think that Harris has increased the percentage of non-white votes who are going to be in this race. I've never been worried that Trump was taking more African Americans. In 1964, Goldwater got 7%. 20 Trump got of African American votes. Trump got 8% in 20. That's 1 point every 56 years. That's not going to change. So I think, what will the percentage of the white vote be, and overall in the electorate, and what will Trump's share be? Trump needs to be north of 57% of the white vote probably to win this race, and it's probably more like 58%. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see their increasingly desperate ways to try to get that vote.
Right. I'm curious, Rachel, just to tie some concepts together here, which is this freedom frame is clearly a frame that works really well straight out the gate for Harris. I am curious, speaking of white men, how you take that freedom frame and apply it to an economic message.
Well, I think that when I think about the vice president's message, there's three things she's focused on. There's opportunity, there's freedom, and there's also justice. And with the freedom frame in particular, I think an important thing is, of course, fundamental freedoms, the right to make decisions about your own body. But one of the messages that I think is the most compelling here to any voter, no matter who you are or where you live, is the democracy piece of that, the rule of law piece of that. I think there's a lot on the ballot this fall, and the vice president has talked about that a lot. But that rule of law message and that question of who do we want to be, a country of chaos and fear, or do we want to be a country of compassion and rule of law that she's been delivering is really effective.